Welcome to Creepy, where reality blurs with the darkness of the unknown. The following story, and the others in this series, are not for the faint of heart. This is a tale, possession, a terrifying reality for some, and an inexplicable nightmare that no one can truly prepare for. Imagine waking up one day, not in control of your own mind, your thoughts alien to you, your body a vessel for something else. What would you do if you couldn't trust your own senses, your own thoughts, if something or someone was in charge of your body while you watched from the inside, helpless and trapped? The notion of possession has haunted humans for centuries, from ancient cultures to today's modern times. Stories of people being taken over by spirits, demons, and otherworldly entities have endured. These experiences are more than just ghost stories told around campfires. They are horrifying, bone-chilling encounters that have left people scarred for life. You've heard of them, right? You've seen the movies. But what if they were real? What if someone you knew had been possessed? Let me take you through a story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the boundaries of human experience, and the terrifying possibility that the supernatural can step into our world, leaving a mark that no one can ever fully erase. It started with a young woman named Sarah. Sarah had always been cheerful and ordinary. Nothing out of the ordinary ever happened in her life. She worked as a receptionist, had a small group of close friends, and lived a peaceful life in a quiet town. However, one fateful evening changed everything. It was a Saturday night when she and a few of her friends decided to visit an old abandoned church on the outskirts of town. No one had been there in years, and it had a reputation for being haunted, though Sarah and her friends didn't believe in such things. They were curious, excited, maybe even a little scared in a fun way, but they never expected what was about to unfold. As they explored the old church, the flickering light of their flashlights illuminated dusty pews and broken stained glass windows. Sarah wandered off from the group. She was drawn to an old creaky door hidden in the back of the building. It was strange. She had never noticed it before, even though she had been there several times in the past. The door creaked open with a faint groaning sound. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with something unnatural. At the far end of the room stood an altar, old and worn, with strange symbols etched into the stone. Sarah stepped closer. There was a strange energy in the room, a pull she couldn't explain, like something was watching her, waiting. That's when it happened. She began to feel an overwhelming pressure in her chest, as though something was pressing down on her from all sides. Her heart raced, her breath shallow, and then whispers, low, indistinct murmurs filled the air. She felt cold, but her skin was burning, her pulse quickening with every passing second. It wasn't just fear, it was something deeper, more primal, a feeling of being haunted, of being found. Her friends heard her scream. They rushed into the room, but Sarah was no longer the same person. Her body trembled, her eyes wide open, but her gaze was vacant. She looked at them, but it wasn't Sarah looking back. It was as though a dark presence had taken root in her, a force far from human. She began to speak in a voice that was not hers, a voice that sounded ancient and guttural. The words were in a language none of them understood, and the air felt thick, charged with an energy they couldn't explain. As Sarah stood there, swaying back and forth, her friends tried to approach her, but something in the room told them to stay away. The whispers, now louder, seemed to grow in intensity. Then Sarah's body stiffened. She collapsed onto the floor, writhing, her hands clutching at the stone beneath her. It was as if she was fighting an unseen force controlling her, bending her. One of her friends, Rachel, rushed forward, reaching out to touch Sarah. But the moment her hand made contact, a terrible force pushed her back, slamming her into the wall. Rachel gasped, trying to breathe, but the air in the room seemed to vanish, leaving only suffocating tension. Desperate, The group fled the church, dragging Sarah with them, but nothing could stop what had already begun. When they arrived at her home, Sarah seemed to return to herself for a brief moment, but then her eyes glazed over again. She collapsed onto the floor, and her body began to convulse violently. The possession, as they would later call it, was not a temporary event. For weeks, Sarah's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She would speak in tongues, moving in unnatural ways, her voice warping into something that felt otherworldly. Family and friends grew terrified, unsure of what to do. They took her to doctors, to therapists, to spiritual healers. Nothing helped. It wasn't until a local priest heard of Sarah's case that they realized what they were dealing with. The priest was a man of faith, but he had also encountered other cases like this before. He had seen things that defied explanation, but nothing had prepared him for what he encountered with Sarah. He could feel the presence when he stepped into the room. Something evil, something ancient, something far more powerful than any human being. The priest, determined to help, began preparing for an exorcism. But what he didn't know was that Sarah's situation was far more dangerous than any of them could have imagined. As Sarah lay in bed that night, surrounded by her family, the air grew thick with an unnatural chill. Her eyes fluttered open, but they were no longer her eyes. This is where our story begins to spiral into a realm of fear, pain, and a battle that no one could have predicted. Sarah's exorcism was only the beginning. As the days passed, the situation surrounding Sarah grew darker and more inexplicable. Father Mallory, the priest, was faced with the horrifying realization that whatever had taken hold of Sarah was not just a demon. It was something older, more insidious, something that had been lurking in the shadows for far longer than anyone could comprehend. It wasn't just the strange movements or the unnerving whispers. It was the feeling that something had crossed the threshold between worlds. Something that shouldn't be able to touch the living was now deep within Sarah's soul, and it had no intention of letting go. The air in Sarah's home became thick with tension. Even when she was silent, when she simply stared out of the window, her gaze empty, the room felt alive with dread. It was as if the very walls were watching, waiting, keeping secret. At night, the whispers intensified, swirling around her in a sickening spiral. They weren't just speaking in the ancient tongue anymore. They were growing bolder, reaching for her consciousness, clawing at the edges of her mind. But it wasn't until one night, when Sarah's family was gathered around her in a desperate, hopeless vigil, that things truly began to spiral out of control. The house was unusually quiet. The tension that had thickened in the past few days had reached its peak, and no one could shake the feeling that something was going to happen. The air was oppressive, as though it were holding its breath, waiting for something to break the silence. Sarah's parents had been beside themselves, praying, pleading for any help that could save their daughter. Her mother, tearful and exhausted, sat at the foot of the bed, whispering promises of a better life, telling Sarah that she could fight this, that they would fight it together. But the thing that had taken hold of her wasn't Sarah anymore. Her body remained motionless for hours, but it wasn't the peaceful stillness of sleep. No, it was as though her very soul was trapped somewhere deep within, watching the horrors unfold, but unable to do a thing. The family's prayers, the desperate pleas for help, fell on deaf ears, and then without warning, Sarah's body jerked violently. Her eyes opened wide, but this time they were not the soft brown eyes of the girl her family knew. No, these were black pits of darkness that swallowed everything around them. They glinted with an unnatural malevolence, like the eyes of something that had seen centuries of suffering, centuries of torment, and knew how to make others feel it too. Her mother cried out, reaching for her, but before she could even touch Sarah's hand, the room seemed to darken. The shadows in the corners of the room stretched and twisted, as though they were coming alive, and the temperature dropped so suddenly that every breath they took felt like a razor against their lungs. Sarah's voice came, but it was not her. It was that guttural, ancient voice again, the voice that belonged to the thing that had taken her. "You think you can save her, don't you?" The words dripped with mocking cruelty, each syllable slow, and deliberate, as though savoring every second of torment. "She is mine now, forever." The words seemed to echo, resonating within the walls of the house, and for a brief, terrible moment, Sarah's family was left in a suffocating silence, as though the very air had been sucked out of the room. Father Mallory, having sensed the shift in the atmosphere, entered the room with a determination that belied the fear creeping into his chest. He knew deep down that this was no ordinary exorcism. This was something different, something far more dangerous. As the priest approached the bed, Sarah's body twitched and spasmed violently. Her limbs moved in unnatural ways, flailing as though caught in the grip of something far stronger than human muscle. Her neck arched back so far it seemed as though it would snap, and her back twisted in a sickening motion. Father Mallory raised his hands, clutching the crucifix, his voice trembling, as he recited the exorcism prayers once more. But the demon that held Sarah did not react in the way he expected. It didn't scream, didn't thrash, it simply laughed. The laugh was deep, reverberating through the room, like a slow guttural growl, rising from deep within Sarah's chest. It was a laugh of contempt, a laugh that said, "You are powerless. You think I care about your prayer." A voice sneered, "She is mine, and she will remain mine, no matter what you do. She belongs to the darkness now." Father Mallory's heart sank, as the words hit him with the force of a blow. He had encountered possession before, yes, but nothing like this. This was something far worse. The darkness within Sarah wasn't a fleeting entity. It was a power, ancient and relentless, that had claimed her and wasn't about to let go. The priest's eyes narrowed with resolve. He stepped closer to the bed, his voice growing stronger. "In the name of God, I command you to leave," he shouted, raising the crucifix higher. But then something happened, something that sent a cold shiver of dread through the priest's spine. The figure in Sarah's body, or whatever it was now, twisted its head at an impossible angle, and with a sickening sound, its jaw unhinged, opening wider than any human mouth should. From deep within Sarah's throat came the faintest whisper of a word that no one could have predicted. It wasn't the demon speaking now, it was something else, something far older, far more terrifying. "She's not the first." The voice trailed off, and for a brief moment, the room seemed to go still. The air grew heavy with something ancient, something that couldn't be explained by reason or science. Father Mallory froze. There was something more to Sarah's possession than he had realized, something far more sinister. As Sarah's body convulsed again, violently this time, the demon inside her began to speak of events, of histories, of things that Father Mallory had never heard of before, tales of a presence, one that had long been forgotten, waiting to reawaken. "I am not alone," the voice hissed, its tone dripping with malevolent glee. "And when I call upon my brethren, you will all fall. She is only the beginning. You cannot stop what is already coming." Father Mallory's mind raced. This was no mere possession. This was a warning, a declaration of something much larger, something far more dangerous than just a single demonic entity, wreaking havoc on one girl's life. As the entity within Sarah spoke of brethren, and something coming, the priest felt a chill of foreboding deep in his body. He wasn't just fighting for Sarah's life anymore, he was fighting for something much bigger, something that perhaps none of them were prepared to face. The room filled with an eerie, oppressive silence, as Sarah's body stilled once again, and yet the fear, the dread remained. What was coming for them, and how could they possibly stop it? Father Mallory and Sarah's family had encountered something far darker than anyone could have imagined. The possession was no longer just a battle for Sarah's soul. It had evolved into a terrifying warning from an ancient force, one that had its eyes on much more than just her. As the room remained still, filled with the oppressive weight of the unseen presence, Father Mallory could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. The demon, or whatever it was that had taken control of Sarah, had spoken of brethren, and of something larger coming. It wasn't just tormenting Sarah anymore, it was threatening the very foundation of their world. The air in the room had grown thick, almost suffocating. Every breath felt like a struggle, the atmosphere pressing down like an unseen hand. And yet, as terrifying as it was, there was something even more unsettling, The silence that followed the demon's cryptic warning. The whispers had stopped. The flickering of the lights, which had been constant, ceased. And for a moment everything seemed. It was then that Father Mallory realized something. The battle for Sarah's soul was not just about an exorcism. This wasn't a case of one demon possessing a single person. No, this was part of something much larger. Something that had been slowly encroaching upon their world for centuries, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now Sarah had become the unwilling vessel, a conduit for something far older and far more powerful than anyone could comprehend. As he looked around the room, at Sarah's mother clutching her rosary in fear, at the father pacing, wringing his hands, Father Mallory knew that they had to act quickly. He had seen the power of possession before, seen how it could twist and tear apart a person's soul. But this was different. There was something in Sarah's possession that felt like a storm waiting to break, something that could tear through not just the family's lives, but perhaps the very fabric of reality itself. Father Mallory's mind raced as he reviewed his options. The traditional exorcism rites were powerful, yes, but would they be enough to expel something that seemed to have so much control, so much malice? He didn't know. The warnings Sarah's possessed body had given him were chilling, but there was little time to think. His faith told him that there was power in God's name, but he had to wonder if that alone would be enough to stop what was coming. Sarah's body suddenly twitched again. Father Mallory turned sharply, stepping toward her, his hand gripping the crucifix with a new, desperate urgency. He had to end this. But before he could speak, Sarah's mouth opened once again, and this time the voice that emerged from her throat was not a whisper. It was loud, harsh, and filled with an unnatural fury. "You think you can stop me?" The demon's voice filled the room, its force reverberating through the walls. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." For a moment, the priest hesitated. He wasn't sure if the thing inside Sarah was merely taunting him, or if it was speaking the truth. Whatever was inside her seemed to know more than it should. It spoke of ancient knowledge, of powers that had been dormant for centuries. Father Mallory, already feeling the weight of the impending darkness, had no choice but to keep going. He stepped forward, his voice booming with renewed strength, as he recited the sacred words. "By the authority of the Holy Father, I command you to leave this child. In the name of the Father, the Son and the Holy Spirit, I bind you." As he spoke the final words, a violent shaking took hold of Sarah's body. She writhed in the bed, her limbs jerking and twisting at angles no human body should be able to. But then just as quickly she fell still. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. It was heavier. It was suffocating. Father Mallory knelt at her side, sweat dripping down his face. Was it over? Had the demon been exorcised from Sarah's body? Or was this just another game? It wasn't until the lights flickered again that he realized the answer. Suddenly Sarah's eyes snapped open, wider than they had before, wider than should have been possible. Black, soulless pits stared back at him. For a moment the priest thought he saw something, a flash of recognition. Was it possible that Sarah was still in there, trapped inside her own body, trying to break free? Then the voice came again, louder this time, more powerful. It was like a storm, shaking the walls with its power. "You think this is over?" The demon's voice was low, mocking. "You're too late." Before Father Mallory could react, the room seemed to shift. The air around them thickened, the walls groaning as if they too were alive. The shadows in the corners of the room grew darker, stretching towards Sarah's body like hungry tendrils, reaching for the priest, for everyone in the room. And that's when Father Mallory saw it. In the shadowed corner of the room, a figure appeared. It was tall, taller than any human being, and it was cloaked in black. The figure moved with an eerie grace, its presence cold, oppressive. It didn't speak, but its eyes, deep, endless pits of black, met the priest's gaze. And in that instant, Father Mallory knew this wasn't just a demonic force. This was something far older, something that had been waiting for centuries to reawaken. The figure didn't need to speak. It didn't need to make a sound. It simply raised a hand, and with that gesture, Sarah's body spasmed once more. But this time it wasn't the demon inside her that caused it. It was as if the very room had been consumed by darkness, and Sarah was the vessel, the unwilling conduit, through which this darkness was beginning to pour into the world. Father Mallory tried to step forward, but his legs felt as though they were rooted to the floor. The air had thickened, and each breath he took felt like a struggle. It was becoming harder and harder to think clearly. The shadows were closing in, and with every passing second, the room seemed to grow colder, colder than any human body should be able to withstand. He struggled to focus. He needed to finish the exorcism. He needed to get Sarah back. But the figure in the corner, the one that had appeared out of nowhere, was moving closer now, its presence suffocating, its eyes never leaving Father Mallory. It knew what he was trying to do, and it was not going to let him. The priest's mind raced. There was no time. The forces that had been unleashed were far more powerful than any single exorcism could hope to combat. But he couldn't stop. He couldn't let the demon win. And then through the darkness came Sarah's voice, broken, weak, yet still there. "Help me." It was a whisper, a desperate plea, but it was enough to fuel Father Mallory's resolve. With one final push, he gathered every ounce of strength and began to chant the prayers with a force that felt like a battle between life and death itself. The room trembled around him. Would it be enough? Would the light return? As Father Mallory's final words echoed through the suffocating air, the oppressive force in the room seemed to hesitate. For a fleeting moment the shadows receded, pulling back just enough to give the priest a small glimmer of hope. But the darkness was far from gone. It was simply biding its time, waiting for another moment of weakness. Sarah's body twitched again, and the unsettling blackness in her eyes returned with a vengeance. The thing inside her was relentless, its power unyielding, and as Father Mallory recited the sacred prayers, he felt a chill run down his spine, deeper than any fear he had ever known. The figure in the corner, the one that had appeared from nowhere, cloaked in shadows, had not moved since it first materialized. It stood there tall and imposing, like a sentry, its black eyes locked onto the priest with an intensity that spoke volumes. It wasn't here to fight, it was simply observing. Its presence alone was enough to freeze Father Mallory's blood in his veins. This wasn't just a demon. No, it was something much older, much darker. A force that had waited patiently for centuries, lying in wait until the right moment had arrived. And now that moment had come. The room trembled again, this time more violently, as if something unseen was pushing against the very foundations of the house. Sarah's body convulsed once more, and for a split second, her face seemed to morph. Her features stretched and twisted into something unnatural, her skin paling to an almost ghostly white. The air grew thick with a suffocating pressure, and the whispers, the low guttural murmurs came back, louder now, as if 1,000 voices were speaking at once. Father Mallory's voice cracked under the weight of the tension. He was exhausted, physically, mentally, and spiritually, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't give in to the fear that gnawed at the edges of his resolve. Sarah needed him, her family needed him, and somehow he knew this wasn't just an exorcism, it was a battle for their very souls. He lifted the crucifix higher, the silver glinting in the dim light, as he shouted, "I command you in the name of the Holy Trinity, leave her now." For a moment, the room became deathly silent, as if time itself had paused. The shadows flickered and swayed, stretching like fingers reaching for the priest, but they held their distance, as if something greater was beginning to stir. Sarah's body lay still, her eyes vacant, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Then the demon's voice sounded again, but this time it was different. It was lower, more ominous, and full of raw power. The voice reverberated inside Father Mallory's skull, twisting his thoughts, forcing him to listen to the terrifying words that followed. "You cannot banish what has always been," it whispered, the words dripping with malice. "We are eternal, and soon, you will all understand. This world, it is ours." Father Mallory staggered backward, feeling the pressure building around him, the walls closing in, suffocating him. The shadows in the room darkened even further, the air growing thick with an unnatural, suffocating cold that seemed to claw at his skin. The words that the demon spoke were like nails scratching against his mind, digging deep into his soul. He could feel the weight of its ancient presence, pulling at him, trying to break his spirit. The figure in the corner moved at last. Slowly, deliberately, it stepped towards Sarah's bed. Its form was tall and distorted, a silhouette of pure darkness,
so impossibly large, that it seemed to fill the entire room. As it moved, the shadows themselves followed, undulating in the corners of the room, like living things. And with each step it took, the temperature dropped another degree. The very air seemed to lose its substance, as if the room was being pulled into a different reality, one where light had no power, and where only the dark truly reigned. Father Mallory's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't breathe, he could barely think. The demon inside Sarah had already weakened him, but now this thing was going to destroy them all. He had to act, and fast. There was no time to second guess. In that instant, something deep within Father Mallory surged, a surge of strength he hadn't known he had. His hand tightened around the crucifix, his voice growing louder as he spoke the final, most sacred prayer. By the blood of Christ, I command you to leave this vessel. You are not welcome here. The light will drive you back. For the briefest of moments there was silence again. The room seemed to hold its breath, and then the air exploded with force. Sarah's body arched violently off the bed, her back twisting at impossible angles, her mouth opening wide with a sound so ear-piercing that it rattled the very window. The figure in the corner recoiled, as if repelled by the force of the words, but it didn't disappear. No, it only seemed to grow stronger, more solid, more terrifying. Father Mallory could feel it now, the weight of the presence, the overwhelming darkness that seemed to crush his soul. The fight wasn't just against Sarah's possession anymore. It was a battle for everything they knew, for reality itself, for the souls of everyone in this house. And in the deepest corner of his mind, Father Mallory realized the truth. This was bigger than any single exorcism. This was the first wave of something much larger, something that had been waiting for centuries to re-enter the world of the living. Sarah's eyes snapped open again, wide and unblinking, and this time, her voice, Sarah's voice, came through, weak, barely audible. Father, please help me. It was the last shred of humanity left in her, and it was enough. It gave Father Mallory the strength to push forward. With a final defiant shout, Father Mallory lifted the crucifix high, and shouted, "In the name of God, I bind you to leave this child's body. You have no power here." For a moment, everything fell silent. The oppressive darkness that had filled the room seemed to pull back, the shadows receding, the air lightening with the slightest hint of warmth. Sarah's body went limp, and the voice, the demon, fell silent. The figure in the corner of the room began to fade, its form dissipating into nothingness. The room, once thick with malevolent energy, seemed to breathe again. The walls, once groaning under the weight of something unnatural, now felt like mere walls once more. Sarah lay still, her breathing steady, her body calm. The blackness that had overtaken her eyes began to fade, and slowly, she blinked, as though waking from a long, terrible night. Father Mallory collapsed to his knees, the weight of the battle leaving him utterly drained. He had done it. He had driven the demon out. But deep inside, he knew this wasn't over. The presence that had threatened Sarah and her family wasn't gone. It was merely biding its time, waiting for the next chance to strike. But for now, they had won. Sarah was free. The darkness had been repelled, but the war was far from over. The story ends. For now, stay tuned for